Is it starting? All right, let's go. So, I'm Miss Liljegren.
I'm Miss St. Lawrence.
And we're going to be having a discussion about
Photograph of the girl on page 20.
page
in our
20
packet.
of our poetry packet. If you can see from here, Miss St. Lawrence, can you hold up your annotations? Mine are, we're heavily annotated. We went hard with it, and we're going to talk about it now. All right. So, do you want me to start? How do we want to start? What's our question? What's our essential question that we're answering?
Okay, so I mean throughout this unit, right, we've asked students to have discussions primarily around what they notice, and also kind of the question that we want people to feel more confident in answering by the end of the discussion is how does form develop or complement theme, right? So we've done this a number of times, and that's why we've decided to tape ourselves today, and the professional nature of this video so far should illustrate how real that is. So if you want, I can start, since you are the one that selected this poem for the packet. So
okay, the only thing I just have some background information that I think might be pertinent to our discussion today, so do you mind if I hit you with that, like
please,
real quick? All right. So, photograph of the girl. We have a photograph in our packet that this poem is based on, and this photograph comes from the Russian famine. Now, do you know anything about the Russian famine?
Not enough.
I didn't either. You know, I'm just an uneducated woman about Russian famines. So, this famine was 1921 to 1922. It began in spring, and it's interesting because this famine was not a natural famine. It happened because of sort of economic and political unrest. The Bolshevik government was taking a huge portion of the peasants' food to sort of redistribute or whatever they do with it, and the peasants revolted by not planting the seeds and not sowing them, you know.
Yeah.
So there was less food, and then they realized, the government realized they were doing that, and then sort of took everything they had, then there was just no food. We got a jokester. We got a jokester in the room.
Maybe for the end.
Maybe for the end.
Okay.
Oh, also, one other thing that's important, that's I think going to be important to the end of the poem, the peasants were hoarding seed grain. Okay. And they were eating the seed grain instead of, yeah.
So the last word of the poem, which is grain.
In this, yeah, golden as drops of grain. So they were eating the seed grain as nutrients instead of planting it because they were so hungry. And about 5 million people died. All right, so on that note, yeah, do you want to take it away?
Sure. All right. I feel like you were starting something really nice. It's like when the smart kid in class talks and you feel silenced.
So it's me.
But, I mean, a lot of what you said makes sense with some of the observations I had. So one thing I noticed about this poem is there's a lot of opposites happening thematically. So if I'm looking up at the top, like the first 4 or 5 stanzas, there's this juxtaposition of open and closed, right? My eyes are closed, mouth are open. Another thing is this idea of being empty and full, right? Another thing that I saw is like there's this oxymoron kind of, this is somewhat related, right? Opposite, but oxymoron, growing thinner, right? I'm growing, but I'm also being taken away. There's the juxtaposition of girl, woman, right? Like the girl's arm is curved in a new way, and then when she ovulates for the first time, that is her becoming a woman. There's death. You know, it says with millions of others, people are going to die, but then amidst this, you know, she lays her first eggs in some way, and that's the promise of life. Decay and newness, dry earth, beauty, hunger. There's a new arm radius, first eggs, puberty, grow. So those kind of opposition, that's there throughout. So that's what I noticed kind of from a content perspective. Also, something I don't typically notice, but this poem seemed to make a point of calling my attention to was sound. So there's a lot of words that start with S and a lot that start with H. sits, stand, sack, starving, says, H, hand, hunger, hot, heat, her, over and over again. I don't know what to make of that. But what's more interesting, I thought, was in the first 3 lines of this poem is the repetition of consonants. So, for those of us that have studied poetic devices, that's the repetition of consonant noises within a word, right? So, I heard a lot of the N sound, right? Stunned, pan, in. And that repeats throughout. And what I thought, now that we've heard kind of the background information that you gave about the starving and the eating of grain, and correct me if I'm wrong, was there cannibalism during this?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that, yeah, and there was a whole bunch of cannibalism happening. That was sort of one of the memorable things, one of the notable things about this particular family.
Okay, awesome. So what's interesting about the N sound, right, is when I was kind of going through that last night, you have to like close your mouth and put your tongue on the roof of your mouth to make an N. No. Yeah. And it requires you to open and close your mouth, like eating, right?
That's a hot take right there. That's very good.
So there's this opening and closing. There's these opposites, one end, and then the other, empty, full, open, close, death and life, and then this repeated N sound, all kind of, I think, I don't know, must be related in some way to the practice of eating and how it has become grotesque or distorted in this photograph, or in this poem about the photograph.
This photographic poem.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are kind of my my cursory observations here. I have another one that I think is a stretch, but I'd like to hear what you have first.
I'm a fan of the stretch observations, but yeah, so I was also paying particular attention to diction and sound. So dry pan of Russia. There's a lot of food connotation words happening here. Dry pan of Russia. Also this internal rhyme, 21 stunned. Which is, it's interesting that she chose to use the numeric form of 1921 because it's not a rhyme that you can see, it's a rhyme that you hear when you say it out loud. Hunger and puberty are taking her together. I think that it's almost impossible to not have, in this context, have like some sort of sexual connotation to it. In terms of like being ravaged or being taken advantage of by these two combating forces. Right.
Do you mind if I interject and add to that?
Do it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about that kind of, what's the word? Violation that seems to be happening in this poem. I saw something similar. I'm happy you brought that up because I was too shy to say something. But yeah, the kind of the passivity of the girl in this piece. Even in the first line, she sits on the hard ground. Yeah. That's perhaps.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there.
Yeah. Maybe other people can get it too.
Yeah, I feel like we've been having a lot of these conversations in my class. I don't know about your class, but I don't know.
They're very mature, so it's probably going to be fine.
Mature content sometimes.
So yeah, but please pick up this idea of being like ravaged or like passive. The girl's kind of a passive agent in this scene of despair and absence. Like there's so much lack here. But sure, taking her together. What else did you see?
So I saw one of my favorite instances of enjambment that I've ever read. She cannot be not beautiful, but she is starving. Like
I have a lot of questions about that line.
Oh,
so go
interesting.
Yeah.
So surfacely, we read that line. She cannot be not beautiful. So. Two negatives, which is, this is a jarring line. She cannot be not beautiful, so she is beautiful, and then, but she is, seems to be just affirming that, and then with that enjambment, that disconnect from the girl in the plight. There's a disconnect, and perhaps, I think that might be the nature of photographs, like, we're able to look at a photograph and not be attached to we can feel an empathy, or perhaps not even an empathy, a sympathy, but we're very detached from it, and I think that enjambment is doing something similar there. Detaching the girl from the verb, starving. Yeah. What questions did you have about it?
That's interesting. So now I'm thinking about this line in a different way. I guess when I read this last night, I was really hung up on the but. and how that complicates this affirmation of like she cannot not be beautiful. Okay, we understand she is beautiful, but she is starving. Like, how would you draw the equation for starving and beautiful? You are beautiful because you are starving?
Yeah.
Like, you can't be both. It's like, you are nice, but, I don't know, I can't think of the synonym. I don't understand what the but is doing there.
So the but is definitely saying that these are mutually exclusive things.
Right.
And which is interesting, and I don't know if this is a stretch, but we're all about stretches. Stretch it out. Maybe the fact that I feel like she's equating beauty and starving in a way that makes me think of just how women are viewed and this idea of thinness as beautiful. So I wonder if this is also a comment on like body image.
I think it might be, right? I mean, I think the stuff that follows is further evidence of that. Each day she grows thinner. Grows has a positive connotation.
Yeah.
To grow is to progress, right? But that growth comes with a thinning, right? Back to those oppositions I kind of talked about in the beginning. And also her bones, so like the structure of her being, are porous. They are see-through. They have holes in them, right? So I don't know if that's the major focus of this poem. I don't know that it is, but something that I was confused about. But if we're kind of going to revert back to what you were talking about with the enjambment of that line, so different part of it, and how that's in some ways mimicking in language how we view a photograph. Perhaps that space between the line is where the viewer or the reader inserts his or herself, and it's like almost like a voyeuristic thing.
Yeah.
What is
Voyeuristic?
voyeurism?
That's a
Look
good
it
one.
up.
Yeah. Look
Right.
it up.
Yeah.
No, I totally. I mean, she insinuates that it's a photograph within the title. Like she could have just said, "This is a poem about this girl." But she has made that pretty clear that we're looking at a photograph of a girl, not the girl herself.
Right, and it's the girl, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to girl or a girl.
Yeah.
It's this specific girl.
This girl.
And I was thinking about this last night, starting with the title, as any good annotating student would do. To call someone the girl or the pair or the study, right? That implies that the audience knows who or what you are talking about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like having the visual aid, I don't think there's any question about that. I don't know. So,
what did you make? So, like, I always come back to this last line. Deep in her, or this last sentence rather, deep in her body, the ovaries let out her first eggs, golden as drops of grain. And like thinking about that in the context of these people are eating the seed grain instead of planting it because they're so hungry, they don't have a choice.
right.
And I don't know, there's something there. There's something there about this nature, growing, fertility, womanhood. It's something that needs to be dissected.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can return to that because I want to share my stretch. Now seems to be the moment for the stretch. So, this last line for me cemented like this opposition throughout. That's like death and life, the life and death situation we see here, and also the death and life that's juxtaposed through content here. But one thing I noticed about the structure of this poem is it's 7 sentences long, and to me, we end kind of in this objectively perhaps triumphant moment where, one, she is consuming food, which doesn't seem to be happening in the poem or at all during 1921 to 22. And two, she, is becoming a woman, has the potential for life. She can create. Yeah. 7 sentences. What is significant about 7 in literature? Typically, it's the 7 days of creation, right? The time it took God to create
This
the
is
world.
not a stretch to me. This is incredible. That's great.
So, I mean, I thought that at least aligned with the way that this poem ended, right? And when I went through and thought about the 7 days of creation, it doesn't map perfectly, but it ends in rest, right?
Yep.
And death in winter, both of those are natural rest.
That's
right?
true.
So, I'm not sure how we can kind of tie all that together. But the last 3 lines that you're calling attention to, the autobiographical significance is there, perhaps this biblical significance is there, but I think the tone of these last 2 lines is also different from the rest of the poem.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So maybe that's a place to try to make sense of it.
So what's interesting is I think that you can, a way to dissect a poem that we can try is to remove a sentence and see what happens. And I think that sentence, the caption says she's going to starve to death that winter with millions of others. If you removed that and just move simply from each day she grows thinner and her bones grow longer, porous, deep in her body, like that seems fine. But that inserted sentence is so jarring and so journalistic and removed. It reminds me of going back to this voyeuristic idea. And removing ourselves from the photograph because we aren't in it.
Right.
We're looking at it. It seems like a reminder.
Yeah. And I think that, like, there's a direct attention to it, right? It says, the caption says, you could, I mean, even if we remove that line, right? If we remove those 3 words, the caption says, so we go, and her bones grow longer, porous, she is going to starve to death. Then it becomes a guess as opposed to, you know, a fact.
The caption is the jarring word there.
Right, yeah. Like another level of observation, right? Like as a viewer, we're like digesting the image, we have the poem, we have the image, we have the person who took the photograph, we have Sharon Olds who wrote the poem about the photograph, and then we have us
reading
the poem about the photograph, right? So it's like 3 layers removed, and I don't know how that changes or adds to what we've been talking about.
I think it complicates it, and that's why this is a rich discussion. We're running out of time, and like we could really talk about this for
an entire class
period.
Just 2 people.
Weird how that works.
Incredible.
But I did want to go back to this, perhaps this last line in the lens of the idea of cannibalism. I don't know, reducing her body to, obviously, we're mammals, so women are mammals, so they have eggs. But I don't know, comparing her eggs to drops of grain, which is something that's being ingested, it does seem to be, while explaining, you know, how tragic it is that her body is still trying to create life. And that's so tragic to me, even though she's dying. She's also sort of being compared to food in a way, and that seems like a foreshadowing. Because the cannibalism that was happening in Russia at the time was not active, like killing people for food. It was sort of reactive. We have a lot of people who are dead, so after the fact, eating them. But it does have a foreshadowing element with that knowledge.
It does. And here I thought that last line was triumphant for a second.
I think it's both, and I think that's, like, her living it to this point and her being photographed and, like, us bearing witness to the photograph is a triumph.
Right.
But it's also so sad, you know? I think that negotiation of those 2 things is what the poem is trying to do.
Okay, maybe at this point we should conclude the back and forth conversation. Typically what I have my students do after a discussion is kind of like summarize some of the interesting things they heard. And then I have them talk about what went well with the discussion. I give this discussion an A+. It was perfect. So we'll just talk about the content.
It was perfect.
Yeah, but I mean that question, if say I were assigned something written about this poem, some of the ideas that I would think about is how
we'll be late.
Yeah, so I would think about, 1, how sound functions in this poem as a way to imitate the theme of consumption or the grotesqueness of consumption. I also might talk about structurally how 7 sentences, all with a hard stop period in the middle of lines, right? talks about kind of, I don't know, the juxtaposition of creation and decay, and how even though you are creating something, it is disruptive and almost violent to these lines in some ways, right? There's a period in the middle. It's a hard stop, everything, every time something new, a new sentence is created, right? Other structural things. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I was going to say I really liked your point about the 7-sentence thing.
Thank you. I really appreciated your autobiographical information.
I mean, we try to all bring something to the discussion. I think we did a great job.
This has been sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, so,
You know,
and Swell water bottles.
hope you enjoyed this cringy production.
Yeah.
Thank you.